He bought the house not because he saw value in it and not because he thought it would change his life. He bought it because no one else wanted the house to exist at all. $50, no contract, no plans, just one condition spoken almost under the breath: don't let it disappear. At the time, he had no idea that this place would begin to attract not people, but silence itself, and that this would become the strangest decision he would ever make. He was 20 and living in a state of later. Later he would find direction. Later he would figure things out. Later life would start. Days passed quietly, without milestones, without turning points, just the sense that everything meaningful was still somewhere ahead of him. The old man lived nearby and barely spoke, not out of coldness, but because words weren't necessary to him. He understood the forest, the weather, the ground beneath his feet. The young man began helping him by accident, once then again, until it became routine, fixing a fence no one planned to paint, carrying water to a house that rarely used electricity, clearing a narrow path that led to a small crooked cabin deep in the trees, so old it felt less built than grown. The house had been there so long people stopped noticing it. It wasn't dangerous, it wasn't valuable. It simply existed, like a stone, like a stump, like something your eyes slide past without registering. The boards were darkened by time, the roof sagged, the windows let light in carefully, as if afraid to disturb what lived inside. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and age, not dirt, but time itself. Cobwebs clung to the corners, old nail marks traced forgotten decisions, shelves stood empty. The silence was so dense it felt fragile, like a sudden movement might shatter it. No one talked about the house, not because it was forbidden, because it was irrelevant, and that was why the conversation came without warning. They were sitting on a bench, not looking at the cabin but toward the forest. The day was unusually still. Leaves barely moved. In places like this, calm doesn't mean safety, it means pause. The old man spoke without turning his head. "The house won't survive another winter," he said, as if commenting on the weather. The young man wanted to reassure him, to say houses can be repaired, winters can be mild, something can always be done. The old man kept looking ahead. "I don't want it taken apart," he said, "or burned. That's what usually happens. Fast, without thought." There was a long silence before he added, "Some things disappear forever when they're touched without reason." Then almost casually he said, "If you want it, you can take it." The words hung in the air. The young man smiled, assuming it was a joke. He had no money, no tools, no idea what he was doing with his life. "How much?" he asked, more out of politeness than interest. The old man named the price without looking at him. $50, not as a bargain, not as generosity, as a question. It took the young man 2 days to understand that. 2 days before he said yes. There were no witnesses, no paperwork. The money passed from one hand to the other as if nothing important had happened. But the first night he stood alone inside the house, he realized the truth. He hadn't bought a building, he had taken responsibility for a silence everyone else had ignored. And he didn't yet know that for the first time in years, the house was no longer empty. The first thing he realized was that fixing the house would ruin it. That understanding came quietly, without logic, like a fact his body accepted before his mind could argue. He stood in the doorway the next morning with a toolbox he didn't open, listening to the way the space held sound, or rather how it refused to. Every noise arrived soft and left immediately. The house wasn't broken, it was resting, and whatever had kept it standing this long wasn't strength but restraint, so he did nothing that looked like work. He didn't replace boards. He didn't straighten walls. He removed old plastic buckets, rusted nails that served no purpose, objects that had been brought inside and forgotten. Each thing he carried out made the air inside feel lighter, as if the room had been holding its breath for decades. He swept slowly, not to clean, but to listen. When the floor creaked, he stopped. When light shifted, he waited. It took hours to clear a space most people would dismiss in minutes. By the third day, something had changed outside, not dramatically, not enough to point at, but the path he had cleared no longer felt abandoned. Leaves stopped reclaiming it as quickly. The forest around the house seemed attentive. On the fourth morning, he heard birds before he saw them, not one kind, but many, different calls overlapping without chaos. They landed on the roof, on the low branches near the window, on the edge of the chimney, as if testing something. He stood still inside, barely breathing, afraid movement would break whatever fragile agreement had formed. That evening, as the light dropped and the air cooled, he noticed shapes at the edge of the trees. Deer, not running, not startled, just present. They stayed longer than animals usually do near humans. One stepped forward, then another. They didn't approach the house. They acknowledged it, as if the place had crossed back into the map of the living. He told no one. There was nothing to tell, no story yet. Just a sense that the house responded not to effort, but to intention. He stopped bringing his phone inside, not as a rule, but because it felt out of place, like speaking loudly in a room where someone was sleeping. He spent nights there without lighting a fire, watching moonlight slide across the floor, listening to wind press against the walls the way water presses against a hull. The strangest part wasn't the silence, it was how full it felt. People assume quiet is empty. This wasn't. It held weight. Thoughts slowed. Time stretched. Decisions that had followed him for years, unresolved, heavy, began to rearrange themselves without force. He didn't write. He didn't plan. He simply stayed. Weeks passed before the first person asked about the house. A friend noticed he was gone more often, asked what he was doing out there. The young man hesitated before answering. He didn't say he was fixing a house. He didn't say he was building anything. He said, "I think it's working." When asked what it was, he couldn't explain. What he didn't realize yet was that the house was no longer just changing him, and it was becoming visible. And once something like that becomes visible, it doesn't stay quiet for long. The first person who stayed overnight wasn't meant to. He came in the late afternoon, curious but skeptical, smiling the way people do when they expect to be unimpressed. He asked where the Wi-Fi was, joked about the lack of electricity, said he'd stay an hour at most. By sunset, he was still there. He didn't touch his phone once after it lost signal. He sat by the window as the light faded, listening to sounds he couldn't name. In the morning, he didn't say much. He thanked the young man quietly, asked when the house would be available again, and left with the kind of expression people wear after a long internal conversation finally ends. After that, people began arriving without explanation, not groups, one at a time. They didn't come for rest. They came carrying something heavy, though they rarely named it. The young man never asked questions. He simply showed them the rules and left. Each visitor changed in small, consistent ways. They walked slower, spoke less, stayed outside longer before leaving. Some returned weeks later, others never did, but sent someone else in their place. The house began to function like a filter, not changing people, but removing what wasn't essential. The rules became clearer with time, though none were written. No clocks, no mirrors, no more than one night. The house wasn't meant to be inhabited, it was meant to be passed through. People paid not for comfort, but for interruption, for a forced stillness they could not recreate anywhere else. Decisions happened there without ceremony. Letters were written and left behind, rings removed, names crossed out in notebooks. The young man never read what was left. He burned the papers after each stay, returning the space to neutrality. Outside, the forest adapted. Birds returned every morning before sunrise, filling the air with layered sound. Deer approached the clearing without fear, lingering long enough to be noticed, then leaving calmly. Visitors spoke of the animals as if they were part of the structure, not decoration. The house no longer felt abandoned, it felt aligned, as if it had remembered its purpose, Years passed without expansion, no second house, no waiting list, no scaling. When the old man died, the young man added nothing except a small wooden plaque inside, placed where sunlight reached it every morning. He understood then what the house truly was: not a business, not a retreat, a boundary, a place where noise ended and attention began. He kept it that way, and that restraint became the reason it lasted. People later asked why he never turned it into something bigger, why he didn't capitalize. He always answered the same way: some things work only if you let them remain small. The house had taught him that. It had survived because someone finally knew when to stop. How did you like the story? Write in the comments.